a cardinal released a written statement that quickly spread through church circles and beyond. It was not an offhand remark or a casual opinion offered during an interview. It was a deliberate and carefully reasoned text published through official channels, and it addressed one of the most sensitive issues in modern Catholic life, the future of the traditional Latin Massachusetts. Many readers expected the usual language about unity and continuity, but the deeper message felt sharper. Beneath familiar words was a clear argument that challenged long-standing assumptions about liturgy, tradition, and authority. What seemed at first like a technical disciplinary matter began to look like a moment that revealed deeper tensions about the direction of the Church. The Cardinal's intervention did not come out of nowhere. It arrived during a period marked by intense internal discussion, official documents, and a growing pattern of decisions that together pointed toward a more centralized and standardized vision of worship. His text defended the legitimacy of restricting the traditional liturgy and framed those restrictions as necessary steps toward preserving ecclesial unity. Rather than treating the old form of the Mass as a treasured inheritance that should be safeguarded, the statement implied that it had become a source of division that needed to be addressed and ultimately overcome. Supporters saw this as a bold attempt to reinforce unity. Critics saw it as a radical shift in how tradition itself was being understood. The timing added another layer of significance. The statement appeared soon after an extraordinary gathering of cardinals that had drawn worldwide attention. That meeting focused heavily on synodality, the idea of shared discernment and participation within the Church. Near the end of that gathering, a separate document about the liturgy circulated among participants, sparking immediate reactions and widespread coverage. In that context, the Cardinal's public reflection felt less like a personal voice and more like a reinforcement of an emerging institutional line. Observers began to connect the dots between recent meetings, newly circulated texts, and the steady tightening of restrictions on the older form of the Roman Rite. If you haven't subscribed, click on the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future videos like this, because what you're about to hear is not just news, it's a wake-up call for every heart that still believes truth should burn brighter than silence. Now grab your rosary, quiet your spirit, and let your heart listen, not just with ears, but with faith. At the center of the Cardinal's argument was a phrase he repeated often: a single rite. He presented it as a fundamental Catholic principle, claiming that unity in worship was essential for unity in faith. According to this logic, maintaining multiple expressions within the same rite risked fragmenting the Church's identity. The argument leaned heavily on the idea that standardization strengthens communion and that differences in liturgical practice could foster division. For many readers, however, the concept raised immediate questions. The history of the Church has long included a diversity of liturgical traditions, even within the Western world, and critics argued that unity had never required strict uniformity. To defend his position, the Cardinal cited historical authority, particularly a document from the 16th century often associated with the post-Tridentine reform of the liturgy. He interpreted that document as evidence that the Church has long sought a single way of celebrating the Mass and that the modern reform continues that tradition. From this perspective, limiting the traditional Latin Mass was not a break with history but a continuation of a long effort to maintain clarity and coherence in worship. Supporters of his argument viewed this as a reasonable reading of history that placed current reforms within a familiar framework. Yet many scholars responded quickly, saying the historical interpretation was flawed. They pointed out that the document cited by the Cardinal did not aim to abolish ancient liturgical traditions but rather to prevent the creation of new and arbitrary rites after a period of upheaval. The same text, they noted, explicitly allowed older forms that had demonstrated long-standing continuity. The traditional Latin Mass clearly met that standard. For these critics, presenting the historical document as justification for suppressing the older liturgy turned its original purpose upside down. The debate soon shifted from policy to history, with each side arguing over the meaning of continuity and the limits of reform. Among the voices raised in response was a bishop known for his strong defense of tradition. He emphasized that the Church has never equated unity with uniformity and that multiple liturgical traditions have coexisted peacefully for centuries. The Ambrosian, Dominican, and Mozarabic rites were offered as examples of legitimate variations that expressed the same faith in different ways. Critics argued that the Cardinal's reasoning ignored this broader historical reality. By framing the issue as a simple choice between unity and diversity, they said, the statement reduced a complex heritage to a narrow administrative concern. The controversy deepened because the Cardinal's text blurred distinctions that many theologians consider essential. It treated reform and cancellation as if they were the same, and it elevated the post-conciliar liturgical form as the sole legitimate expression of the Roman Rite. The older liturgy, by contrast, appeared increasingly delegitimized, not simply regulated but portrayed as an obstacle to ecclesial harmony. For supporters of the restrictions, this clarity was long overdue. For opponents, it felt like a direct challenge to a living tradition that had shaped countless generations of believers. Silence from higher authorities added another dimension. After the statement circulated and criticism intensified, there were no official denials or clarifications. The cardinal responsible for promoting related documents remained in his position, and the author of the controversial statement continued to hold office despite being well beyond the usual age for retirement. Many observers interpreted this lack of response as a sign of continuity, if not implicit approval. In a church where public corrections are not uncommon, the absence of any formal distancing carried its own message. Reactions from scholars and clergy came swiftly. Some described the historical arguments as intellectually dishonest, accusing proponents of restrictions of bending history to fit a predetermined agenda. They argued that the issue was not primarily pastoral or theological but strategic, part of a broader effort to reshape the Church's identity around a particular vision of unity. In this vision, tradition itself could be reframed as an obstacle rather than a foundation. The debate quickly spread beyond academic circles, drawing in lay Catholics who felt that something fundamental was at stake. At the same time, critics pointed to a striking contrast between the energy devoted to limiting the traditional Latin Mass and the handling of other serious challenges facing the Church. Numerous dioceses in North America continued to grapple with the financial and moral fallout of past scandals, declaring bankruptcy and closing parishes under the weight of legal settlements. Communities were being dismantled, properties sold, and faithful families displaced. Yet the same urgency and strong language used in discussions about liturgy did not seem as visible in addressing these crises. For many observers, this imbalance raised uncomfortable questions about priorities and leadership. Supporters of the Cardinal's position argued that unity in worship is essential for healing deeper wounds within the Church. They maintained that disagreements over liturgy could become symbols of broader divisions and that decisive action was necessary to maintain coherence. Opponents countered that focusing on the older liturgy risked alienating communities that felt deeply connected to it while leaving other urgent problems unresolved. The discussion became less about rubrics and more about vision: what kind of church was emerging from these decisions, and what values would guide its future. As the debate unfolded, the traditional Latin Mass became more than a liturgical form. It turned into a symbol of continuity with centuries of practice and a test case for how the Church balances authority with heritage. For some leaders, restricting it was a practical step toward reducing conflict. For others, it represented a narrowing of the Church's identity and a move away from a historically rich diversity. The disagreement revealed deeper tensions about how unity should be pursued, through integration that allows multiple expressions to coexist, or through standardization that seeks clarity through uniform practice. Many observers noted that the Cardinal's argument framed unity as something achieved through reduction rather than inclusion. Instead of integrating different expressions into a shared whole, the approach seemed to favor simplifying the liturgical landscape to avoid disagreement. This raised fears that other long-standing traditions might eventually face similar pressure. The older Mass, in this sense, became a proving ground for a broader strategy of governance. Whether or not it objectively caused division, it represented a visible connection to a past that could not easily be reshaped by modern reforms. The conversation continued to intensify as more voices joined in. Some priests and faithful spoke about the spiritual fruits they had experienced through the traditional liturgy, emphasizing that their attachment was not rooted in nostalgia but in a sense of reverence and continuity. Others argued that unity requires shared practices and that allowing parallel forms could lead to competing communities within the same church. The debate moved beyond documents and into lived experience, revealing how deeply personal and emotional liturgy can be. Throughout all of this, the lack of clear resolution kept tensions alive. Each new statement or silence was interpreted through the lens of an ongoing struggle over identity and direction. For those who favored the restrictions, the Cardinal's text provided a coherent rationale grounded in authority and historical interpretation. For those who opposed it, the same text confirmed fears that tradition was being redefined in ways that sidelined voices attached to older practices. Both sides believed they were defending the unity of the Church, yet they envisioned that unity in very different ways. As the weeks passed, it became clear that the issue would not fade quickly. The debate touched on fundamental questions about history, theology, governance, and the meaning of continuity itself. Every new intervention generated further discussion, and every official silence was analyzed for hidden meaning. What began as a disciplinary matter had grown into a wider reflection on how the Church understands its past and shapes its future. The traditional Latin Mass, once seen by many as a niche concern, now stood at the center of a broader conversation about authority, diversity, and the limits of reform. In the end, the Cardinal's statement did more than justify a policy. It exposed an underlying vision of unity that relies on standardization and control rather than integration and plurality. Whether that vision will prevail remains uncertain, but the controversy has already reshaped the conversation around liturgy and tradition. As long as the issue is treated primarily as an administrative problem rather than a deeply rooted historical and theological reality, the cycle of resistance and response is likely to continue. Each new decision will carry symbolic weight, and each silence will speak almost as loudly as any public declaration. The unfolding moment has revealed not only a conflict over one form of the Mass but also a broader struggle over how the Church navigates continuity and change in an era marked by uncertainty and transformation. If this message touched your heart, like this video and share your thoughts in the comment Amen and stay with us. More Eucharistic stories, deeper reflections, and holy insights are on the way. May Christ in the Eucharist be your light, your rest, your truth. Amen.